Buenas tardes, muy bienvenida a esta sesión.
Good afternoon and welcome to this work session to reach our conclusions after this almost 3 days of work here, but a lot of work prior to the platform. I am going to explain what we're going to do now in the next hour, hour and a half, depending on how we can be more efficient with our time use. In order to begin the session, Ricardo Mena is going to introduce the process of the communique of Guayaquil. Then Maria del Pilar, our minister, will read it so that you can follow the text that is being handed out right now. And it's being handed out in English and in Spanish. I will then request for you to support us in this, to give your support to this communique. After having distributed the communique, we're going to invite the groups of stakeholders to make a very brief presentation and to give us their statements of commitment in writing very quickly. And having concluded this work, we will continue with the declaration, with the statements of the governments and other groups that have stated that they actually would like to make a statement. We can continue working until 5. At 5, we will begin with the closing ceremony. The 10 countries made their statements this morning, but we still have 12 to go. 10, only 10. So I would like to request that please you respect the 5 minutes that have been allocated for these interventions, for the government statements, the country statements. Having said this, I am going to invite Ricardo Mena, head of our office in the Americas, to explain the work process to get to the communique of Guayaquil. What has been done, Ricardo? Thank you very much, Mrs. Wallström, and I would like to refer very quickly to the process that we have followed in order to draft the communique that you have in front of you and which is also being projected on the screens. The communique of Guayaquil, which is to your left in English and to your right in Spanish. Oh no, I'm sorry, both are being projected in Spanish. Okay, that's it. One in English and one in Spanish. And so, as you well know, at the end of each regional platform, we issue a communique, which is a non-binding document that summarizes the points of view, the perspectives that have been discussed and worked on during the work of this platform, and which are a first draft that tries to highlight the most important issues coming out of these discussions.
Documento que en esta ocasión ha sido elaborado.
This document has been put together, by the Advisory Council for the Regional Platform for the Reduction of Disaster Risk in the Americas, which is our guiding entity to define the structure of the document as well as the topics and contents of the agenda of the platform. Along these lines, the Advisory Council After having a first draft, comments were circulated through from all of the members of the Advisory Council, and the second draft that we had available was handed to an editorial committee, which has helped us along these 3 days to polish and improve the document, but above all, to include the main issues that have been cropping up in each one of the theme sessions, as well as the parallel sessions that have been developed until today. From the start of the platform on Tuesday, I would like to thank the members of the editorial committee very much. They have carried out an extraordinary work, trying to have reflected in the document the viewpoints and priorities of the different stakeholders that are members of the regional platform, which are, of course, governments, intergovernmental organizations, international organizations, the different groups of stakeholders involved in this topic, local governments, members of the civil society, representatives also from parliaments, members of the private sector, communitary organizations, NGOs, etc., etc. So all of you who are here and who have contributed so extensively to our discussions in the last 3 days. This is an important product, obviously, of this platform, and it is also a sort of guidelines and document of references, so that those stakeholders that are going to continue with the process towards the creation of the new international framework for disaster risk reduction can include the elements that they consider are relevant to support their positions in the negotiations that will begin in July. So I repeat, this is not a binding document. It is a document of consensus that reflects the very broad visions of all of the stakeholders that I have just mentioned. In addition to the communiqué of Guayaquil, which is the document that we will review now, we are going to make available in the website of the platform a summary of the national consultation processes that we have supported in the last 3 to 4 months, and which also contribute in some aspects that are going to be of interest to you. And that synthesis document will be open for you to contribute additional elements and aspects to what's included there. And we will leave this open for a period of approximately 10 days, so that through the website you will be able to make comments. In the case of the communiqué of Guayaquil, that document will have to be adopted in the same session. Having told you a little bit about the process that we followed, I would like to give the floor back to the president of the session. Thank you for that presentation, and I now have the pleasure of inviting Minister Cornejo for her to read the communiqué of Guayaquil in this 4th regional platform for disaster risk reduction. Thank you. I will read it in Spanish, and I would like to request to the people carrying out the translation that as soon as I finish I'm sorry, not with the translation, with the projection, that as soon as I finish, you roll up both documents. Communiqué of Guayaquil, Ecuador Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. Guayaquil, May 28th, 2014. It should say 29th, shouldn't it? Yes, that should be corrected to 29th. We, participants at the 4th session of the Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas, meeting in Guayaquil, Ecuador, from May 27th to 29th, 2014, thank the people and government of the Republic of Ecuador, particularly, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility for the hospitality and support provided for the successful carrying out of this 4th session of the regional platform. 2. We acknowledge the substantial contributions of the Hyogo Framework for Action 2005-2015 for the formulation of strategies and policies for disaster risk management in order to progress towards eradicating poverty, reducing inequality, and achieving sustainable and inclusive development. It is necessary to assess progress and challenges in implementing disaster risk management policies at all territorial and sectoral levels and suggest the necessary adjustments of the post-2015 framework for action. 3. Highlight that the economic loss and damage resulting from disasters and their impact on development continue to increase, mainly from disasters associated with the occurrence of events of low intensity that are hydrometeorological. Moreover, the situation tends to be aggravated by population growth and current patterns of development, in particular accelerated urbanization, which, when accompanied by weak structures of governance, leads to higher levels of exposure and a greater level of vulnerability in general of nations and communities. 4. Emphasize the great opportunity to influence from the participants' perspective realms of action, the negotiations on the definition of the post-2015 development agenda, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, as well as the new strategic agenda arising from the World Humanitarian Summit. 5. Highlight the leadership of national governments and the significant progress in the transformation of the legal and institutional frameworks and practices with the aim of consolidating a shift away from response-oriented approaches towards development-oriented approaches, both at the territorial and sectoral level, for effective risk reduction such as the PCGIR in Central America, the CDM Strategy 2014-2024 in the Caribbean, as well as the definition of risk management as a state policy in countries such as Ecuador, new comprehensive risk management laws such as in Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Peru, and the many efforts at the local and community level. 6. Recognize the critical role of local governments in disaster risk reduction and strategic management of sustainable development as frontline governments. 7. Acknowledge the contributions of the Making Cities Resilient, My City is Getting Ready global campaign and the achievements obtained in local risk management and urban resilience. 8. Note that 89% of the countries in the Americas are implementing national initiatives on safe hospitals and improve the resilience of new and existing health care services in order to ensure continuity of operations in the event of a disaster. 9. Affirm that protecting essential services, particularly schools and hospitals, is a social priority, a collective and political responsibility, and is crucial for achieving resilient communities. 10. Reiterate the importance of community participation in disaster risk reduction and civic responsibility, as well as the responsibility of the states and territories to take necessary action in this regard in accordance with the respective regulatory framework. 11. Recognize the work and the support in building resilient communities of the organizations and networks of the civil society based on community, including women's organizations, indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples that express through a significant participation in different venues of decision-making at the local, national, regional, and global level. 12. Express our commitment to contribute to the process of review and refinement of the HFA that will result in the post-2015 International Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, recognizing that management capacities and the availability of resources to advance towards the risk reduction goals vary considerably across the Americas. This framework should give particular attention to the unique situation of small island and developing states in terms of exposure and vulnerability. 13. Acknowledge the importance of regional cooperation and integration mechanisms such as CARICOM, SICA, UNASUR, AEC, CELAC, and OAS, as well as on intergovernmental agreements and action plans aimed at strengthening policies, adopting strategic risk management agendas. 14. Support the commitments presented before the regional platform by representatives of local governments, as well as the voluntary commitments of civil society organizations, the private sector, and children, youth, and adolescents. 15. Recognize the need to improve coordination in international disaster response, including the process established by the International Humanitarian Assistance Mechanism, MIA, and further strengthen the preparedness, response, and recovery capacity at all community, local, national, and regional levels. 16. Value the contributions of the scientific and academic community in generating knowledge and technological development for risk management decision-making. Recommendations for the post-2015 International Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. 17. Actively work towards achieving coherence among the new agendas surrounding development, risk management, climate change, humanitarian action, and the Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development. Such coherence is expressed in the definition of common indicators and objectives, as well as in the efficient use of resources to promote greater impact within nations and communities. 18. Periodically review the progress towards comprehensive development, enabling the evaluation of coherence and convergence in the application through, among other things, the development of indicators of resilience and new agreed-upon methodologies for monitoring and follow-up, with particular emphasis on the priorities of communities and countries. 19. Improve disaster risk management governance among the various sectors and levels of government, ensuring the responsible participation of the different actors at the local and national levels through, as relevant, decentralization with allocated budgets, clear subsidiary systems, regulations, policies, legislation, and sectorial action plans and accountability mechanisms. 20. Incorporate a focus on the rights of all social sectors, in particular the rights of women, children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, and the young as a cross-cutting foundation of sustainable development and the implementation of public policies, guaranteeing their inclusive participation in the mechanisms for protection and equitable access to health services, education, dignified labor, and social security. Such a focus must value ancestral knowledge and traditions of indigenous peoples and people of African descent throughout the region to prepare, deal with, and overcome disasters. 21. Promote a cross-cutting focus on gender in the development of local and national public policies on disaster risk reduction, guaranteeing that gender considerations are mainstreamed within institutions and recognizing the active participation and leadership of women in strategic risk management. I hope next time we have more women participating. 22. Place community participation at the center of risk management in order to enhance greater comprehension and understanding of risks, access to information, decision-making, strengthen capacities and organizations, the protection of lives, livelihoods, and food security. 23. clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the different actors among the various levels of government and society, respecting autonomy and the established mechanisms surrounding coordination and cooperation. 24. Explicitly incorporate local governments in the post-Hyogo Framework of Action 2015 as pertinent actors, relevant actors in risk management with specific competences, taking into consideration the different institutional situations and resources of the different levels of the Americas. 25. Create mechanisms and tools that allow local governments to access various types of resources as well as scientific, technical, and financial cooperation in a decentralized way. 26. Promote, nurture alliances, networks, conglomerations of communities, and city alliances, as well as the participation of citizens, communities, and civil society in order to achieve true good governance surrounding urban risk and resilience and at the local, national, regional, and international levels. 27. Promote urban and rural land use planning as a key element for disaster risk reduction, incorporating a corrective and prospective vision to risk within the planning policies and regulatory frameworks surrounding the mandate and daily responsibilities of all levels of government. It is indispensable to strengthen methodologies that include these visions in regulatory relevant instruments, codes, and planning standards, as well as to achieve greater access and citizens' participation and interaction between local authorities and the private sector. 28. Establish the development and implementation of safe school and hospital policies and programs as a priority for action at the local, national, and regional level in order to protect and guarantee access to education and health services before, during, and after disaster situations as a contribution towards the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. 29. Protect and promote the social, physical, and mental well-being of people as a fundamental asset of communities and nations in order to achieve the goals of sustainable development and disaster risk management. 30. Stimulate policies surrounding fiscal vulnerability reduction in order to guarantee sustainability, including new regulations that contemplate reducing the vulnerability of new projects, cost-benefit analysis manuals, and mechanisms for disaster risk reduction budget tracking, as well as the development of complementary instruments for risk transfer and retention. Similarly, motivate coordinated work among those overseeing the planning and implementation of projects. 31. Highlight that the responsibility of the private sector in building sustainable development should be registered within the mainstream efforts of all actors involved in risk management. Aspects such as business continuity and protecting employees from labor risks, while important, should also be integrated within a broader vision of risk reduction generated by their activities within their social and territorial surroundings. 32. Define the roles, responsibilities, resources, and interinstitutional coordination for recovery. States are encouraged to develop anticipatory planning processes surrounding recovery, including institutional budgets that ensure the avoidance of reconstructing risk and generating new risks. 33. Promote the responsible participation of media in awareness-raising processes, education, and public information in order to support management policies and incentives for resilience. 34. Integrate knowledge and information for formulating evidence-based risk management policies. To do so, Access to interdisciplinary scientific inputs must be ensured for all actors, with consideration given to local identity as well as conditions regarding culture, gender, and specific needs. The establishment of a scientific academic mechanism is wanted to advise country authorities and strengthen exchange networks. 35. Design and articulate educational proposals in schools and universities that emphasize civic values and responsibility. 36. Foster horizontal and triangular cooperation to favor the exchange of good practices and stimulate strengthening local, national, and regional capacities that take into consideration transboundary elements and shared resources in terms of ecosystems, watershed management, cultural aspects, among others. 37. Ensure proper disaster preparedness, readiness, and response that include improved coordination capacities at all levels, including legal aspects, resource mobilization, and management of technological information systems, as well as proper planning for early recovery to ensure the protection of livelihoods and productive assets, including livestock, working animals, implements, and seeds. 38. Promote integration and coherence among the disaster risk reduction agendas of the United Nations system. To this end, we call upon the United Nations to strengthen its Office for Disaster Risk Reduction in order to fulfill its mandate, including risk modeling, disaster loss databases, review of regional strategies, as well as to lead the review of terminology and support monitoring the implementation of the post-2015 framework. Thank you very much, María del Pilar Cornejo. And I am not sure if I can tell you, if I can count that this communiqué has been endorsed by all of the assistants. This communiqué on the work carried out in Guayaquil, is it, I don't know if it is considered endorsed. Meanwhile, I would like to thank the Advisory Council for this work, as well as the Review Committee for the draft. Well, on behalf of Ecuador, we consider this communiqué of Guayaquil adopted. There is a proposal from our colleague of the Dominican Republic. I'm sorry, I cannot hear him. He's not using the microphone. Well, item 3. I would like to read it because there is a phrase that says due to population growth. And because here we are talking about factors that are not positive. If we include that population growth is a factor that affects risk management, we would suggest that, because this is about human beings and population, that we should delete it or change it, because otherwise we could say that for risk management problems to be reduced, it would be better to have a decrease in population. Very well, we take note. And we will look for a more suitable drafting of this. Apart from that, do you think this reflects adequately your work? Yes, very well. So we will adopt it then. Thank you.
Es que no es el crecimiento de la población, sino el crecimiento desordenado de las zonas urbanas.
De urbanas, sí.
A eso se refiere.
Entonces, sí,
So we're only explaining this comment of yours so that we can clarify it and make sure that we understand it completely. And we believe that your intention is clear now. And as well, it coincides with the editorial committee. And now we will continue with the representatives of the stakeholders groups that were going to add their comments very briefly as far as their work here. And I'm going to invite you to give their names, and then we're going to invite the states, the countries to continue with their presentations and statements. And if there are any other comments from this audience, you will have an opportunity to do so soon. As I have already received the endorsement by the Minister Cornejo, I'm going to invite the representative of the intergovernmental organizations represented by Mr. Barbosa to take the floor for his brief comment.
Dos minutos. Someone needs to help to move them, otherwise it takes
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Con respecto
Good afternoon, everyone. With regard to the Guayaquil statement and the review made just now, as CEPRE de LAC, we are also endorsing this document within the framework, as was already explained by Don Ricardo Melna. It's a non-binding document to be reviewed, and it's an orienting framework for all the delegations for each one of the countries, where each country has its final word. And this will be just as a roadmap for orienting the direction, and to be able to arrive at March 2015 in Japan with a proposal that is consolidated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good example of being brief and to the point.
Y un representante de los municipalidades.
A representative from the municipalities and local governments, Mr. Jose Manuel Corral. He represents the city of Santa Fe in Argentina. But here he is now representing all of the local governments. Good afternoon, thank you. He has given me some minutes. The authorities of the local governments come to ratify the guidelines of our framework for action of Hyogo in the global platform for 2015, and we feel we are represented by the communique, the statement of Guayaquil that has just been adopted. We are convinced that the climate change, in addition, gives us challenges that are greater than the ones we already had for mankind, and that's why we are in favor of thematic agendas and efforts and everything regarding sustainable development, climate change, urban planning and territorial planning, and risk management, disaster risk management. Resilience must be understood as a factor for development, not just mitigation of risk. A development based on equity, because those who are more vulnerable, the weakest ones are the neediest, they are the ones that are most exposed to risks, and they're the most vulnerable. The worst part is always suffered by those who have the least. In the most unprotected areas, disasters are greater impact, have a greater impact in areas where the recovery is even harder, and therefore we need policies for local social inclusion. increasingly mankind is going to live in cities because of the double phenomenon of the increase of world population and in globalization circumstances. We believe that the next decades the cities will grow significantly, and depending on how this development is deployed, the known disasters may actually increase or reduce. That's why we are convinced that we should localize the disaster risk management, because it's in the level of territories with their governments, their communities, and their authorities where we can define these topics. We consider, therefore, indispensable to have hierarchization of the voices of the local governments as agents for constructing resilience and as promoters of a sustainable development with equity. And we believe that this is one of the chapters that the Hyogo framework post 2015 must incorporate explicitly. Resilience is constructed from up, down, up. Um, and we are the civil society and its members that are faced with these challenges, and we need to incorporate these capacities to reduce the disaster risk. In this regard, we can have advances and concrete accomplishments that tell us what else the road to that lies ahead. In this regard, the relevance of the World Campaign to Develop Resilient Cities is important, and the Office of the United Nations for the disaster risk reduction is in place as a very specific tool to promote essential aspects of the within the Hyogo framework. We would like to promote from the local governments that we use mechanisms that are specifically going to use the local governments. It's not just a political determination, but it is also important to have tools and concrete programs for orienting, training, and strengthening the local capacities and governance, so much so that the organizations are referring to them as national and subnational organizations in each country. We are all the local governments who are active part of this process, and we want to be recognized as protagonists. And we have responsibilities, competencies, and specific powers and authorities. And we have the day-to-day work with our communities, and we believe it is necessary to also acknowledge the civil society and the private sector, all of whom are essential actors for building resilience, which needs to be based on participation and real involvement of the citizens. We all have responsibilities, and we're all accountable. And that disasters are not limited by borders or frontiers or administrative duties. That's why we're committed to increase cities, networks, associations, and communities, so that in every territory, all efforts are joined to generate a sustainable development based on the risk management and adaptation to climate change. Into this, we also need the support of the higher structures, both subnational as well as national, looking to join efforts and resources. Finally, we'd like to highlight that I'll leave on for the record that with the cooperation with the representatives of Bogota and many other cities, we have drafted a voluntary commitment letter that all of us offer to assume in order to develop a sustainable development based on equity, resilience, and disaster risk management as specific indicators that will allow us to measure the concrete results of these actions and progress made in this regard. And now we leave this commitment to Ms. Wallström.
Muchas gracias por esta declaración.
Thank you very much for this statement of a commitment by the governments, the municipal governments, and there are some more places on this side if you are looking for a place. And I invite Mr. Roberto Leon, who represents the group of parliamentaries that have worked here for several days. Good afternoon. In order, we We fully share the declarations. And in the interest of time, I want to say that number 3 was especially good, 18 and 38 as well. I look like a pastor quoting the Bible paragraphs, but versicles, but I'm saying this just because of the following. Number 3 is saying something that I realized that when I was here only 2 days in this conference. And you have 4 conferences already. We're looking for agreements. But nature continues to do its work. A lot has been written, and I think it's impossible to write anything else, and the damage continues to increase. So I believe this needs to take us necessarily to ask what is happening, what's going on, why don't we have a harmony? Why aren't we harmonious between theory and what practical practices, between harmony and theory and practice? If in our countries, if we really put into practice in our respective countries what we're saying in theory, then in 10 years we would be just fine at least. The damage should have maintained or even decreased, but that hasn't happened. Therefore, there is a task that we need to see that it has to do with what is mentioned in number 18, paragraph 18, which is citizen participation and community participation. Undoubtedly, we have to do a lot of work in that area, and that's the key. Parliamentary participation is fundamental in this regard because one hears what's going on. And yesterday, several people mentioned the lack of political will, and I share that opinion. And the lack of resources, and I hear that, yeah, and yes, we do share that same opinion. So I think it's important to understand that we need to be capable of saying to our respective governments, look, unless you invest on this, you're going to spend all this. And that means it's not just a theory. Yesterday I heard one of the representatives from Ecuador who was saying that they're already beginning and they're preparing for the Niño current, and it's true. My dear Margareta, that's a more practical thing. We're also going to be here in Chile, and let me tell you, here in Chile we either have the Niña or the Niño, and when we're resting, we'll have the tsunamis and the earthquakes. So the concrete thing is that we've got to be capable of saying, between the Niño phenomenon, the last one we had, and the next one that we will be suffering or hit by, what are we to correct? What are we supposed to correct? We know that if my province, which is a farming province, I know which rivers are going to flood. And the question is, what are we going to do? And I'm sure that happens everywhere. It's not just in my country. All those who are going to be affected. So in that regard, we need to have solution proposals that are more practical, and whenever the time comes, the moment comes that we can be capable of saying, okay, between this event and this other event, we have made great progress. And as Chile, we knew how to grow and how to progress. The earthquake, the 2010 earthquake and tsunami showed us naked vis-a-vis the international community. 4 years later, in 24 hours, we had 2 earthquakes, over 8 on the Richter scale. And INEMI, which is directed by Ricardo Toro, operated really well, and we're very proud of that performance. But I think we still have a long ways to go with a policy that goes beyond all that. And I think that we need to strengthen your office to be able to forge ahead in these lines. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Ahora invito a un representante de la Federación Internacional de la Cruz Roja, el señor Xavier Castellanos.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Señora ministra, no puedo empezar sin reconocer su liderazgo, el liderazgo de su equipo por este extraordinario evento y la calidad de hospitalidad que hemos tenido aquí en Guayaquil, Ecuador.
That we've had here in Guayaquil, Ecuador. I would be remiss if I do not mention Margareta's leadership for the disaster risk management and reduction, and Ricardo's leadership where he and his team have deployed a fantastic work in this dialogue and with all the stakeholders and humanitarian stakeholders and governments of the civil society and governments, etc., for the Crescent and the International Red Cross organizations. To all of us, the statement of Guayaquil reflects the spirit and the responsibility that our organization does have and promotes, with over 5,000 local Red Cross offices in the Americas, and which is always closed permanently next to communities at all times. And therefore, the Federation is very pleased to join this initiative. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I invite a representative from the private sector, Angela Gomez, to please take the floor. And she is going to explain the commitment of the volunteers. Good afternoon to all. I would like to also thank the government of Ecuador and the Office of the United Nations, UNISDR, for this invitation and for the opportunity to allow us to present to you these proposals and commitments, and we hope that these will fill the expectations of all stakeholders. Initially, we were looking at these with the companies present in this platform. We're looking and reading the statement, and we can say that the statement does reflect the private sector's commitment, which has been submitted here at this meeting, and that it is reflected in the statement. So we just have one observation, very small observation, with regard to including in number 34, which is the one that refers to commitment and responsibility of the private sector. We would add something that has to do that this has to be generated from a strategic level by the companies and businesses. And we would like to, and I have the pleasure and the honor to present to you in a very summarized way the voluntary commitment that the private sector is offering in this platform. And of course, this will be will be included as an annex to this document, this statement of Guayaquil communique. Okay, I'm going to summarize it very briefly. This is a part of the whereas clauses, and you can summarize it as follows. In the next few years, we need to take into account that the private sector has to make several investments, and those investments must be resilient, and that on the one hand, we do have experience, knowledge, and resources that the private sector can contribute, and that must be taken advantage of, and then also that there must be an articulation of all efforts of the private sector with the national authorities that manage risk in the Americas. And we also need to understand that whereas, those are the whereas clauses, and I have summarized the commitments. First, to create awareness within and without the companies, identifying vulnerabilities that they have in their communities and territories, and to follow the guidelines that can be, that are offered by the Hyogo framework, and of course applying the ones that we currently have, and also promoting the new memberships and what we have already submitted in the morning today, and to identify and socialize good practices in terms of risk management that the private sector may have in order to implement these guidelines of the Hyogo framework. Also, fourth, to promote the development of a platform that in such a way that the private sector can have and develop a prospective culture for disaster risk management in accordance with the guidelines that we will receive from the UNISDR. And also to support processes and regulations for implementation programs that in our different countries, so that we can actually strengthen these efforts jointly in terms of risk reduction, disaster risk reduction. And so, of course, these are commitments that we have. We need to verify them, and there are means to verify them. And I am going to submit the voluntary commitment declaration. I would like to thank the private sector, and I would also, because they have also submitted their voluntary commitment and a declaration there too for next year. And now I would like to invite a representative from the groups of women, Ms. Sandy Schillen here. Representing groups of women. Thank you, Margareta, and good afternoon to all. Because I'm going to speak in English because time is of the essence. Estoy aquí representando grupos de mujeres que trabajan para su empoderamiento y la promoción de la igualdad de género en la región a nivel de niveles locales y globales.
Of the Community Practitioner Platform. We have created organizing mechanisms to ensure grassroots women's groups represent their own experiences and priorities in disaster risk reduction fora, and have 15 grassroots leaders here at the platform from 7 countries. Additionally, we led a consensus-building dialogue on gender priorities as a parallel event on day 1, which involved more than 80 people. The Guayaquil draft declaration amplifies important points touching upon our core priorities. We are especially supportive of principles 10, 11, and 16, which emphasize the importance of community participation and citizen engagement in DRR and accountability processes, which call for the recognition of the work and inputs of community-based civil society organizations and networks, especially those of grassroots women, indigenous people, and Afro-descendants in promoting community resilience, and that also value the knowledge and skills of these groups as key stakeholders. In the recommendations, we are also very pleased to see the addition of clearly articulated leadership roles for local authorities. Key decision makers and partners in the things we care for in expanding the public leadership of grassroots women and promoting planning and implementation mechanisms that are community-driven and accountable. We similarly support recommendations 25 and 26 in this context, and wish to announce that from now until Sendai, We will be increasing our cooperation with local authorities and their networks in the region to expand our voluntary contributions and sustain our advocacy to ensure that HFA2 strategically scales up local action for risk management and resilience. With these positives noted, we feel there is a need to narrow the gap between the stated principles of community participation and commitment to women's empowerment and the recommendations as currently formulated. Grassroots women's organizations exist in rural and urban communities through farmers, indigenous peoples, producers, cooperatives, and organizations, and through informal settlements, slum dweller, and street vendor associations. They must be recognized and referred to as leaders in community resilience, and thus as stakeholders, not as target groups, not as beneficiaries of social protection, or embedded under civil society and gender. Only in surfacing as protagonists can grassroots women's groups function as a constituency that is focused on formalizing their public roles and partnerships, and in ensuring that public policies are implemented in a way that advance resilient and sustainable development and participatory local governance. Our emerging recommendations, especially number 22, will succeed only if it requires and invites participatory democratic citizen engagement and embraces local as well as national decision makers promoting complementarity across them. Hence, we are asking support to narrow the gap currently existing in the recommendations. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that public policy and institutional programs accelerate the public role of women, indigenous people, and poor people's organizations, from agenda setting to implementation to monitoring roles. In this context, recommendations 19, 25, 26, and 27 establish opportunities to specify roles for grassroots groups to play in ensuring land use and urban planning promotes social and cultural equity and responsiveness, that women's groups are facilitated to access local budgets and evaluate DRR and development initiatives and expand their public leadership role in these processes. It is also important to explicitly acknowledge a central role for women in disaster recovery processes and the need to craft gender-just entitlement packages, recommendation number 32. This is what gender mainstreaming from the bottom up looks like and what will move us from rhetoric to reality. So we welcome the chance to continue partnering and especially applaud the leadership of the two visionary women on the dais. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandy, on behalf of the women's community groups, for also your suggestions to have a stronger inclusion of women as a constituency, as an actor. And now I'd like to invite a representative of the group of donors, represented by Luis de la Fuente. Mm-hmm.
Muchas gracias. Me uno a la felicitación de señor Mena.
Thank you very much. I would like to join my colleagues in congratulating you, Mrs. Wallström and Madam Minister. Thank you very much, and really congratulations for your organization. Thank you for the incredible hospitality that you have had with all of us. But above all, I would like to congratulate someone. I have 600 people here, and that is what I'm looking at. I have 600 people in front of me, and that shows me that disaster risk reduction is policy, that everything is possible, that everything that we have included in the declaration is not only rhetoric, it's a fact. What I would like is to read the following statement. All stakeholders are working towards tackling risk reduction and adaptation to climate change from a global perspective, trying to build amongst all a response that would allow to minimize damages of disasters. But this global vision should not hide the most important vision. The most vital action is made locally. This platform serves to celebrate advances and achievements of the region. Well, we must not forget that risk management requires all of our efforts to continue innovating, improving our roadmap towards a new framework of action. It is necessary for us not to forget the need to include elements of protection to rights protections in issues of resilience, so that those who are most vulnerable can have all the tools to be resilient. We must not only promote good practices, but we must make sure that they are shared and used by all. Knowledge, if it is not followed by actions, has no value. In addition to this, accessing useful information on disaster impact and in a timely manner is fundamental for risk reduction. It optimizes the response of humanitarian aid as well as investment for risk reduction. We would like to give a message so that humanitarian principles are also respected: humanity, neutrality, impartiality, independence, and for humanitarian action to be carried out in a function of the most vulnerable. We would like to request all stakeholders to face in a more pronounced manner all of the challenges that we have included in this declaration, and also tackle others like violence, growing urbanization. And let's hope that this coming Hyogo framework will integrate the lessons learned in Latin America from 2005 and to 2015 and before that, and that it will give continuity to the processes that have been promoted so far. Thank you very much.